Welcome to the Grow Your Money podcast, where we're on a mission to change how we talk about money. Our fireside chats are the heart of our show, bringing the energy and excitement of in-person events straight to your ears. We aim to connect you with inspiring voices and stories that matter, sharing relatable experiences and insights that will transform your financial life. Everyone deserves access to practical financial knowledge, so we're making money conversations relatable by inviting guests from all walks of life to share their real-life experiences with money. But this isn't your typical money show. We look at the emotional, psychological, and cultural factors that shape our relationship with money. So hit subscribe and join us for another episode of the Grow Your Money podcast.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Tina Matembe, and I'm the founder of Moneymatics, which is all about inclusive financial education. I set up Moneymatics a few years ago, all based on the lived experience I had had moving over to the UK and quickly becoming financially vulnerable because you come here and you don't have a credit file, you don't have a credit history. Also, I was coming from a place of cash. So this was all new to me. And so I just became vulnerable really quickly, not because I didn't have money, but because I didn't understand the system and I was not accounted for. Then I soon had children and I was like, no way, I don't want them having at all going through what I've been through, and tried to find a solution that could provide education for me as a newcomer, for them as young people who are children of two worlds coming from, being raised by parents who had grown up with cash, but in this very much credit based and digital moving economy. And there was nothing that quite fit. So what we do at Moneymatics is we design programs and services that support untold stories with financial education that can help their use cases. That's a brief background about me. I'm so happy to have Brian with us, and I would love for you, Brian, to introduce yourself, and very welcome to this podcast.
Thank you, Tina. I'm excited to join this discussion as I'm current member of the board of the UK Financial Inclusion Forum. Really looking to see and learn more about how kind of our diverse network from mainstream finance, universities, nonprofits, government can really continue to deepen engagement and discussion and, hold the sector interested in financial inclusion accountable to progressing financial access that's more suitable, fair, affordable for those, left out of the system, marginalized in the UK and abroad. My own career journey, I would say, began quite a long time ago in international development, where, I felt quite a lot of discomfort from the sort of top-down approaches to setting up a lot of supposedly inclusive programs and financial inclusion, social enterprise and such. And I quickly moved into, the grant funding and social investment sector, which at the time I thought, okay, pass-through funding directly into communities and partnership communities was really something that I wanted to support. And while I think that's, done a lot and been quite impactful, I quickly became aware of the need to really evaluate then those programs, those grant and social investment programs that inherently in their design and setup and management themselves are exclusive and, need to be rigorously kind of judged in terms of how those funds are actually disseminated. So I'm just really happy now to be part of that discussion and to join the Financial Inclusion Forum to kind of help bring some of these issues of inclusion to the broader sector and see what we can do to make things really better for people out there.
That's awesome. And we discovered that we have so much in common. And I think we have very common interests. Interestingly, we've also just been speaking to someone else from the Financial Inclusion Forum. I think it's really important to put some context around what we're talking about today, which will, lead nicely into the conversation. So this session is all around putting consumers first to navigate financial innovation and inclusion in the digital age right now. And I think with all the nuances that happen and that are going on right now, with the AI coming up and all that sort of thing, there's so much going on in the marketplace and it's going on so fast that you can't keep pace. So financial inclusion is even starting to look different, because what is inclusion in a world where there's, it's robo investment, robo advisors, looks different from the days before, where inclusion was about getting people into doors, right? So it's such a changing landscape. It's so strange and different. And certainly when I moved over here, that nuance for me was just between cash and credit, right? It was cash or cashless. Now there's more things, there's more layers. Now it is cash, it's cashless, it's robo advisory, it's access to branches and physical presence. It's just so many things. And so I think what we would like to unpack today is around how we put a consumer first in this ever changing environment. And I'm quite interested, Brian, in your background. You're at a business you're the head of a business lending at the startup Skylight Ventures, and I would like to just know how your work fits into this whole sphere with your work with refugees.
Yeah, I mean, that's been quite an adventure over the last year, is going from sort of big ticket social investments into social enterprises and CDFIs and credit unions that I've worked with over the years, to actually getting very small amounts of capital into the hands of founders from refugee backgrounds in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, part of that really is, I mean, how do you design basically a completely new lending institution that is actually tailored to an audience and a client base with very specific needs, essentially. And I mean, what we've seen over the last year is, I mean, really two kind of key things that, I mean, I would bring out and I think really apply kind of broadly across financial inclusion is: one, I mean, we not to reinvent the wheel and try to think you can do better than a lot of service providers that are out there already working day to day to serve, in this case, founders from refugee backgrounds with very complex, diverse financial situations, and
Mm-hmm.
also complex and diverse understanding of, what starting a business in the UK means. So I think really building relationships with that ecosystem of service providers out there, and I'm including Moneymatics in that ecosystem. And then second, I think bringing from the first step, kind of lived experience into your lending processes. So while I'm head of business lending in this startup, Scarlet
Mm-hmm.
Ventures, I mean, really, I'm trying to get applications for loans to our panel of lived experience experts, which are current entrepreneurs from refugee backgrounds, and most of our customer satisfaction impact monitoring also being done by those from the community that have either had an experience already with a loan or starting up a business in the community and such, and kind of letting them lead, sort of drawing conclusions and learnings from the work.
That's awesome, Brian. And I think it's important to highlight, because financial inclusion in itself literally just refers to access, right? Making sure that everyone has access to financial services that's affordable, to financial literacy that's affordable, to technology, to consumer protection, to those sorts of areas. But I think the importance of this topic comes back to also the nuances in people's user journeys. So, for example, when you're looking at putting the consumer first, when you're talking about refugees, they really, in essence, are different from migrants. And within that category of migrants, there's also different types of migrants.
Mm-hmm.
So, a refugee is typically someone who has been forced out of their homeland. They have to make home somewhere else. That's the dictionary definition of that. You find that they'll have very different nuanced needs. Whereas a migrant has typically chosen to move to the country to study, to do whatever it is, economic reasons, whatever it is. But then there's another layer of second generation and third generation migrants that we were talking about. My children, for example, I was struggling with this concept of, well, I'm finding financial education out there. I don't have a clue how this relates to my child. It's certainly not how I'm going to speak to them in the day to day. It's certainly not the experience I'm going to put across to them. and yet I need them to learn services in the UK. So how do you even go about, juggling that? And that was so difficult for me to get my head round. And
Hmm.
so I wonder what your experiences have been with that sort of thing in designing what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, on that, I would really love to hear even from your side then the next step, because I feel that is just been such a struggle over the last year. I
Mhm.
mean, I think that, we talk about exclusion, financial exclusion, and I mean, a lot of the language and conversation around that is almost like groups of people, populations that really are a problem, that need to be dealt with. And and we look at like the nonprofit sector and that to sort of solve that problem, when I think going through the journey of actually establishing a new UK lender, looking at a very complex client base, is really then thinking, I mean, there's just this major flaw in how financial products are really being designed, how they're being, evolved over time, and how they're even kind of understanding who their client is, and how their products impact different clients. I mean, I guess, you've talked a bit about your historical experience, and then I've seen, your manifesto and your kind of big ideas for change, and I would just be interested to understand, I mean, that whole idea of product design, and I mean, is there just an inherent like flaw in how, I guess, financial service providers are actually managing their products?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the first thing that struck me and continues to strike me is just how excluded the people that organizations are designing for are out of the process. So you're trying to create a platform for, you're trying to solve a problem of inclusion, and the people you're trying to include are completely not involved in the design. And by that I mean, it's not a case of going and doing some research and ticking some boxes and saying, okay, I asked you a set of questions. It's sitting down with them over a long period of time to understand their user journey. What happens in the day to day? What do they eat? All these things affect someone's lifestyle and inherently affect what they do with money, affects how they approach services, right? So you really need to have an intimate or a close enough relationship with a user group to be
Hmm.
able to understand how you're going to design for them. And short of not being that user group, you really have to account for having them in that user journey. But interestingly, I was looking at a statistic and it said that if you designed a product for a disabled person, you inherently design for everyone because everyone has similar needs. You're just making it more accessible for a user group, right? And so it's how do we help organizations understand that? That's the question that we always try to put across is, listen, if you design this for with these people in mind, you'll make products and services better anyway. One example I like to use is language. When you're designing something for someone that has language as has English as a second language, you really need to be thinking at a grade 2 level, grade 2 to grade 3 level. But there is no harm in that for anyone across any spectrum for you to write a simplified financial text, right? So that the person benefits, but inherently your business as a whole benefits. So I think there's a big piece around understanding that putting the consumer first means that you need to first take responsibility of the fact that you're not that consumer, and therefore you need an intimate understanding from the consumer themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just to build on that just quickly, I mean, I just find it so scary today. I mean, statistics are coming out that actually exclusion is almost becoming the new normal, where coming out of the cost of living and COVID, I mean, almost a majority of UK adults essentially feel financially vulnerable. They feel excluded from financial services, and they don't know how to navigate the financial system. And I mean, as you've seen working with, I mean, marginalized communities in the UK before the recent sort of economic challenges, I mean, the writing was on the wall that you can't just, you know, design financial products to a very sort of specific and narrow definition of a customer. And here you see, we're talking about communities that have been left out for a long time. And then basically today, we're finding that, I mean, most of the UK is slowly being essentially excluded because, I mean, there's just not really that inclusion in the design process, and that idea of putting the customer first in what most people in the UK need to thrive financially.
Yes, absolutely. And then there is the whole other barrage of even understanding what it is you're solving for. And I suppose, in fairness to financial services, is you have to deal with the consumer duty and other laws and regulations. Then you have the consumer to think about. Then you have the bottom line because you have to think about profit as well. So where does inclusion come in? So a big thing for me has been trying to get rich data. I think it's very important that putting the customer first includes rich data. So you need to know your data points of what type of things do we need to solve for, but also how does each of those lines affect our bottom line, right? Because if you do that, it helps you to justify budgets sometimes. I've gone into so many boardrooms and had a conversation around, well, that's not our customer. And it's like, it probably is, because I had someone say to me, oh no, our customer is a middle-aged man riding a lawnmower. And I said, what makes you think that the community that I serve is not a middle-aged man riding a lawnmower or potentially able to ride a lawnmower? So it's trying to understand how we do that reporting and budgeting to include consumer first as part of the design inherently. And I guess one part of innovation as well with it, it's constantly changing, it's evolving every day. So you're keeping on top of so many things. So you have to have a culture in the workplace where inclusion and putting the customer first is somehow built into everything you do. And that's not always easy to do, certainly not by any means at all.
Yeah, and I just wonder, I mean, you mentioned, consumer duty, which of course, I mean, was rolled out relatively recently and created quite a lot of waves in terms of trying to comply with that and actually think about, being responsible for the outcomes of your customer. Obviously, we're dealing with high levels of financial insecurity in the UK, and meanwhile, rapid digitalization and people talking about automating, using AI to automate services, which, I mean, honestly, if you're not putting your customer first, what is that really going to mean for the end product when we go through that journey? And it feels like right now is almost a very kind of critical moment in time, to really kind of seize seize the conversation and try and really kind of turn around, I guess, the way financial services have been sort of designed and managed until now. I'm not sure if you're seeing any opportunities for that kind of optimism or not.
Yeah, I was going to touch on that actually because it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? It's if we over automate or we go the other way, what happens to that typically excluded? But I wonder, so it's a double-edged sword. It could be an opportunity,
Hmm.
because in consumer finance, there's typically been an issue around bias, for example. Bias can easily be solved by a lot of the technology that's coming out if we used it properly.
Hmm.
Data points are not that great at the moment, but if we get richer data, it hopefully starts helping in time. But it goes back to the point of you have to have had the people in mind from the outset for you to design a product or an AI or whatever technology it is that's right. Because if the data is flawed, the output's going to be flawed. So I think right now we're at such a good place where we're at the cusp of something changing. So
Hmm.
we have the opportunity to input positively to it. And I wonder what you found with with your work working with the entrepreneur. If is there particular nuances that feed into this, that for example could be designed for.
Yeah, and I think like you say, it's true. It's a bit of a balance. It's definitely a balance, and especially in the beginning, as you're thinking to be more digital, more automated, and of course with that comes also cost savings, ability to scale, ability to get to customers hopefully quicker and easier in many cases. But not, I mean, I think it's also drawing a sort of line in the sand in terms of how quickly do you progress into that, and what your checks are to really understand when you're actually succeeding and you're still kind of carrying out your mission of, outreach and serving your customer, without abandoning them, before you kind of necessarily, through can scale and, grow, kind of see growth through leveraging technology. I mean, I think yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is, like you said, is like really thinking about critically about a technological solution and seeing, where you can get small wins at first and still keep, I think, very important human touch points with your customers. And like you said, using technology as a double check on, what people are doing in their positions to see how they're making decisions, and actually looking at, what does sort of the digital decisioning platform on a loan tell you about a customer, and what do, the loan officers that are physically reviewing files, getting from a customer's application, and then comparing the two. And I think having an open mind then in terms of kind of what the future can look like on how you will make decisions, just as someone providing credit, I think, into the market.
100%, I agree. Because, like the whole bit around human support, um, it can't go away. So it's like, at what point do you move from automation into human support? Which areas should have the human support? And how do you enable the users, in this case, when we're talking about people of color or people that are marginalized? How do you include that in your digital transformation journey? You also touched on something there that I think lends into consumer education, because we tend to we provide generic information, generic data, one size fits all education, financial or other, and we think that that works. But if we categorized our consumers and we just knew those different, like we talked about refugees being different from migrants typically, having those different life moments would be absolutely helpful in this, because you'd then be able to look at everyone's life moment, look at the education and the stuff you have, and realize, okay, I've left out this person on this point. Again, to do that, we need very rich data. We need very good resources around that are robust to help with that. Um, I wonder what your thoughts are on the role of privacy today in addressing these consumer privacy issues as well, because we're looking at data today. Data as an asset, yeah, creates issues around data protection. We've recently had that whole stuff around data consumer acts and that. Do you think it has a role in inclusion and putting the consumer first? Is there what are your findings in terms of the role that data is playing in helping navigate financial innovation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely important. I mean, there's nothing more, I think, disempowering than, seeing their data go out the door, and then realizing down the road that it was used for something that, may not have been in their best interest, something that they were not aware of, that, it was used perhaps to benefit others in the market or service providers. Yeah, and I think that, heading that off now, as sort of big data just obviously is gathering momentum globally, is critically important. I think, yeah, being able to giving everybody the power, to know how their data is being used, and also like how they can use their data to their own advantage if possible.
Yes.
Obviously, we know a lot of people are judged in the financial system based on the data that shows up in the history, of their experiences in the financial sector, and that becomes very complex. And I mean, ideally, anybody then should, on the other side, be able to navigate and leverage, I guess, their experience to their benefit, and be able to kind of use it to show that they can access, more and better services out there. Yeah, I would love to know. I mean, just in terms of I mean, your work in financial education. Yeah, is that something kind of top of mind of those you're working with?
Yes, so there's this, it's again, there's two things, there's two issues. There's either a consumer that completely has no understanding of their own rights to data, how they're using data, how they're exposing themselves. Um, Very early on, myself in the journey here, you don't understand how your activity online, for example, or your exploration of financial products, you don't understand how it's affecting your access to credit and things. So, for example, you'd be online searching, a typical someone that's new to the country, you're online searching for a product, a lending product, for example, and you go and put in your details in 4 different websites, and they're all doing a credit search on you. You don't understand that. That's not been communicated clearly to
Yeah.
you. Even if it's being communicated to you, you don't understand what the repercussion of that is. So there's that side of things where there's literally data ignorance. And so you're harming yourself unknowingly, you're putting yourself out, you're exposing yourself unknowingly. Then there's the side where it's just too legal and so mind blowing. So you're becoming overprotective. And finding that middle balance can be really difficult, especially when you're struggling with other things. You're a refugee, for example. There's so many other things to deal with. So you don't know what to do with, you don't know what you're doing. And so I think what we found is trying to give education around the do's and don'ts, the key spotlights of what's going to harm you in your data and what you certainly shouldn't do and what the law is around it. That's usually a good starting point because so many people, so many consumers. We worked with a lady once who had applied for 7 credit cards in the same day, you know, and it's saying, listen, these are all going on your credit file. What's a credit file? Well, it
Hmm.
keeps, she says, I've not allowed to give them that information. Well, inherently you have by filling in this form. There was a terms and conditions, all that sort of thing. And it's back to language. It's back to putting the consumer first. At what point do you advise someone that's new to country about these data points versus someone that's been here and gone to university and now is in the workplace, right? And so that's where I was saying that innovation is really will definitely help this if we curb it early. So if we have all these use cases in place, guess what? Then you can design your data education for an immigrant. You can design it for a refugee. You can design it for Brian. You can design it for Tina. It's
Hmm.
easy for you to customize. You have to know those categories beforehand to do anything with it.
Yeah. And I would just, add there, I mean, really brings out the importance, I think, when I think of like community of support that's out there. So, I mean,
Yes.
you talk about even understanding how your data is used. Then you think of a case where would you go with a complaint if you felt, you'd been taken advantage of and you already feel very insecure in your place living in the UK and unsure about how systems work broadly, certainly
Yes.
as a refugee, but even more broadly
Yes.
than that. You think how would I mean how would you do that? How would you know if your credit report had an error on it, and how would you kind of fix that so
Yeah.
that you're actually getting a fair kind of a fair view of yourself as a potential lender? And I mean that's where we really are trying to dig out in the UK network, because there are so many just actors out there that are trying to make it easier for
Mhm.
consumers to really just take advantage of their rights and sort of the responsibilities that finance service providers have towards customers, even at a most basic level. And I
Mhm.
think it's important that all of us, as much as possible, really like invest in and build off of each other if we are in the financial inclusion space, to try and make things better and not try to really go it alone, because it's just really too big of an issue and just too complicated.
100%. And you touched on something there actually that's quite important because it goes back to the point we were raising earlier around having the people you're designing the product for linked in the product design.
Hmm.
So something you mentioned there around how do you know where to report a case, right? If you're a refugee, you already have a burden and an anxiety of reporting things because you feel like you're a target, you don't feel wanted,
Hmm.
and you don't feel like you have a right to a lot of things. There is very little opportunity for you to report things like this. If your credit file has something wrong on it, you're just going to feel like it has something wrong. I don't know what to do with that. So understanding that psychology and that background is really, really important. You can only do that if you're working with the people, and so
Mhm.
that you can understand that sort of thing. You're testing out those solutions quite early on. Otherwise, you miss out on this. You design an amazing product. You're trying to help, but guess what? The people are not coming to it because you didn't design for that psychological mindset in it. And I think it brings me to my next point around collaborating and conversation. I mean, this is one of the reasons we're doing this right now. It's how do you collaboratively continue to make this work, right? Partnerships that matter, conversations like this so that everyone is listening to it and having that sound bite. Working with people who are already working in these sectors is so important to helping that, because such a big issue as you were saying. So we need to be collaborative in that sense if it's going to go anywhere. So lived experience, collaboration, and conversation is
Yeah.
really important. I wanted to know from you, um, what in your work, what do you find that is the most important thing that could move the dial?
Yeah, I mean, I think really, and you've touched on this already, but I think really getting at mainstream services and making them realize that mainstream means it's for everybody. So
Mhm.
it's not, I mean, it's just not acceptable, I think, to have empty promises and to, I mean, there's obviously a risk of even kind of, idea of like kind of social washing or like, doing kind of small visible things that that come off positively but don't
Mhm.
really have a massive impact. So I mean, I think in terms of joining the financial inclusion forum and
Mhm.
kind of being able to help build and drive, I think, a more public discussion among different actors is really that. I mean, just kind
Yeah.
of grabbing hold of mainstream service providers and doing exactly what you're saying, like
Yeah.
design for the spectrum of customers that are out there, and hold it accountable if people are saying that they're doing that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and making sure the research, the data is then filtering into action products, and then the nice report at the end of the year that says
Yeah.
this is the impact that we've had in reducing financial exclusion in the UK and abroad.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So it's moving from the research into action is so important.
Yeah.
And you're right, it has to start with a conversation, because the conversation will quickly move to, okay, we've been talking about this for so long. What are we doing about it? Then you're going to get into action mode, right? So it's really important.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly.
Um, and then I wonder on the back of that, the linkage, because again, there's the assumption and there's the biased assumption that people of color or refugees or immigrants are poor people. Like that's just, you talk immigration and it's linked directly to poverty, right? I wonder if there's a role of, well, we know that there's a role for financial education, but I wonder if there's a wider role for educating masses or the public on changing that narrative. I don't know how that we go about doing that, but there's that role as well of, when you're trying to partner with someone, these are clients that are not thought of as profit making.
Hmm.
And what we do at Moneymatics certainly is we try to say to end users, we try to say to the financial services, and that if this person is educated or you give them the tools they need, they're going to be worth X amount of money more to your organization,
Hmm.
right? Because when you go into a meeting room and you talk about a demographic, they're just like, no, we don't work with them. They're lost leaders. Why should they continue to be lost leaders? And like that's the question and the bias that you're always up against.
And I guess, how do you, I guess, bring that lens to, I guess, institutions that are, companies that are moving, at a million miles an hour. They've
Yeah,
done things a certain way for a very long time. I mean,
yeah.
what is the strategy, I guess, for the future? Maybe as a closing.
Yeah, I think the key thing as well is back to that lived experience, trying to show different use cases, different stories of success.
Hmm.
Um, I usually like to link it to other economies that are doing a good job of it.
Hmm.
And then if you can try to link it to something within their bottom line that will definitely move the dial, that would be amazing. So, for example, I'll use an example of anti-money laundering, because internationals are typically bring a lot of money in from other countries. So the general assumption is that, oh my goodness, this is a big deal, money coming in and out. You're very anxious because of the anti-money laundering laws. But if you looked at the volume of transactions that are going to happen over the course of a customer's life cycle, it's worth your while to smoothen that journey of making international transactions from their bank account helpful. So it's trying to flip it and say, you think this person is poor? Well, they're sending X amount of money out to their country every other day. They're doing XYZ, using their consumer behavior, again, back to rich data, using that consumer behavior to say, maybe you're mismeasuring this customer. And so trying to refine that and show them that the pound or dollar values of the clients, which is not usually, you know, straightforward. But there's all these other things. I mean, it's looking at. I mean, the volume of international payments is a very good example of that. Also, nuanced services and looking at what that looks like. So, Islamic banking, for example, what's the size of that market? Bring it to life for the mainstream banks would be a very good way to open their eyes and say, maybe you're misjudging this person. If you put more money into innovation, it would help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and it's just, yeah, it's mind blowing that we're kind of having this discussion, and that the sector has, I think, lagged so much in actually fueling design, research and design of products for, I mean, huge swaths of the population in the UK, and I know abroad as well. So
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's gone by so quickly. It's been over 30 minutes having this conversation. I
yeah.
just wanted to know what your what you wanted people to take away from this conversation around inclusive design and innovation as we wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to go back, I really just to go back to sort of, I guess a bit of what I opened is just, I mean, to be excluded from the finance sector is not something that people should feel ashamed about, or it's a problem that the charity sector or whatever needs to deal with. It's
Mm.
really like an inherent flaw in how businesses are being run, how the research and development of products and services being done, because as you said, there's massive potential, social, economic potential in people that are excluded. And if they're not navigating the products out there, then there's something wrong with the financial services sector. It's not the people themselves. So yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, I say bring that lens into conversations around financial inclusion.
I agree. I think you're spot on in terms of it feels like a place of shame. You're just always on the back foot, right? So you give up and you think, no, I shouldn't be doing this. I think encouraging conversation, which I have to applaud FIF for. You guys are good at that piece of trying to encourage conversations first of all. And the shame should not be on either side, even for financial services. It's room for growth. I think it's that step and that willingness, the willingness to make progress is really important. Um, Thank you so much. It's been amazing having you. This is really good. Um, I think the key thing for me is I want people to understand that financial education is a fundamental tool both for consumers and also people who are providing services. So if you can think about which touch points in your design you're educating your customer, and make sure that you're educating as many different use cases as possible, then you become more inclusive. So one exercise I like to do when I go into organizations is, who here, how many in your organization have a different experience from the leadership? And as many people, when you count out the leadership, have different experiences, is as many unique cases you're going to have. So it's a very good way to think about it. And are those people being heard? Are you listening to those different, transitions and journeys? I think that's the key thing, is how can you provide education around data, around finance, around products and services, so that you can make it easier, because we're going into the digital age. There's no turning back from it, but how do we make it better? And we are in such a good place for it at this point.
Amazing. Thank you, Tina. I mean, yeah, the work you're doing is so inspiring because you're just doing the very micro level work of kind of education, empowerment, financial literacy to people that are not connecting with the system. And then also kind of driving discussions around, big picture obstacles to everything from mortgages and pensions and other areas of financial exclusion. So yeah, I definitely, I think in terms of looking at our 2025 strategy as the Financial Inclusion Forum, I mean, really taking some of this, I think, to heart and just kind of injecting it into future programs, future discussions, future events is just critical.
Absolutely, yeah. And I
Yeah.
think to your point, you were talking about even just in terms of conversations and the different lenses. I'm talking from a place of literally, I'm a migrant as well. I've lived here all these years, and so when I set up Moneymatics, I was like, yep, I think I know what the issue is. I've lived through this. But guess what? No, I've lived through my own lens.
Mm-hmm.
It's different for a migrant woman who's Muslim, for example, and it's different for a migrant child. Or there are so many different nuances
Yeah.
that you want to always try to be widening that lens, and you can't do it having the conversations yourself. So you have to kind of engage all different sectors of the economy, of the scale. Um, one thing like one area around, you've talked about mortgages, so I remember this one around even understanding the psychology around consumer finance, where you feel you are. If you're a refugee, are you feeling at home? If you feel at home, you're more likely to get on the property ladder at some point in time or to work towards it. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't feel like this is home, you're working in a temporary mindset, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so again, how do you design for someone that feels like they're living here temporarily versus someone that's living here long term? So I think it's having those so many different user journeys that you can marry up, and I mean, conversations is part of that journey.
Yeah. So
Yes,
true. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely.
yes. Well, it's been a lovely conversation, Brian. Nice hanging out with you, and I look forward to doing more of this.
Yeah, definitely. Tina, thank you for having me. And yeah, it's been great to talk today.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to the Grow Your Money podcast. If you're looking to take actionable steps toward achieving your financial goals, visit moneymatix.com. That is money, MATIX.com. And join our free Grow Your Money challenge. Let's unite in the movement to inspire people to talk about money. Thank you for being a part of our community. We'll see you in the next episode.